Hello! This is going to be a different sort of video and a much more personal one. It doesn't come up all the time, but I am a highly sensitive person. Now, the definition of that is a little bit hard to pinpoint because the research on it is relatively new and it varies so much depending on the person. But basically, it's theorized as someone with a deeper sensory processing, so feeling things much more intensely than an average person and becoming overwhelmed because of this very easily. This can also manifest in greater stimulation from sound, touch, or texture. Not a lot of people know about this trait, and it can be incredibly hard to explain, so I often feel like I'm kind of justifying myself for making up excuses or like a total fraud when asked about it. But while it may be hard to understand, it is always definitely there. Sometimes so overwhelmingly so that I feel like the side effects of being highly sensitive are more real than I am as a person. When I was young, I remember people like my father, for example, found me very hard to understand. Sometimes he didn't need to, though. He just accommodated me in any way he could, even if it was strange. I remember things like him being exasperated when I wouldn't swallow my food because once it was chewed, it became too squishy and I was afraid I would puke. Or being afraid of very specific things on movies and TV, like things that were large in size. Eventually, in my teens, and this was before I knew anything about highly sensitive people, I latched onto a character from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles named Raphael. I didn't know exactly why, maybe I just thought he was the cool one, but it was the parts where he was emotional that sold it for me. He was cool and tough, while also being emotional. Eventually, more reasons came to light. In most versions of TMNT, Raph felt like his brothers didn't understand him, and that when he tried to be better at controlling his emotions, everyone else made it harder for him all over again, because they just have no idea what it's like to be in his shoes. They write him off as a jerk without really making an effort to understand him. And by the way, I think the general public in real life doesn't always make an effort to understand characters like this either. I tried to find the article for this video, I couldn't find it again, but I do remember reading an article that was describing Raph as a psychopath because of this time in the comics where he almost hits his brother with a wrench. I can't believe the audacity to write such a thing when you didn't even mention the next scene where Raphael runs away crying because he can't believe he almost did that in a blind fit of rage, and thinking about how much he loves his brother and wondering what's wrong with him if he can't control himself like that. But anyways, it was around this time that people started calling me sensitive. Not highly sensitive, they just called me what they knew, and mostly I also got the feeling that they didn't understand. Being called sensitive made me angry, which of course just seemed to prove their point. I guess I was angry not just because I felt misunderstood, but also because I thought sensitive was equal to being weak, and I couldn't be weak. If I was weak, how was I ever going to survive the crippling emotions I was starting to feel more and more as I matured? I tried to ignore everyone because my explanations seemed to fall on deaf ears. But I remember the first time the word sensitive started to take on a new meaning, a more positive one. I was watching a TMNT 2012 DVD in the back of the van on a road trip to help take care of my grandparents in another city. I was actually watching behind the scenes interviews and stuff. One of the crew, I think maybe it was a producer, described Raphael in his own words. He said something like, "I think Raphael gets so angry because he is the most sensitive of the turtles." That shocked me, and I was almost upset. It couldn't be. Raphael was cool and strong. He was like me. It couldn't be that he was weak and lame because that would mean that maybe I was too. But it began to dawn on me that maybe that meant that the word sensitive didn't mean weak. Maybe it just meant different. Maybe it just meant that it was harder for Raphael, and for me too. And maybe that made both of us strong. Unfortunately, it also made us both a world of pain. I don't want to talk about all the specifics here, but I was told a lot of things by people close to me, including that I had a low mental capacity, that I could not handle hard work, and that I was probably autistic. I was told that no one thinks that I'm normal, I was not normal, and that I would never be able to function independently without intensive counseling and medication. Today, I can say that while therapy and counseling is a huge help and a blessing, and medication sometimes is too, telling someone what they're capable of and how their own mind works is total bullshit. It was essentially setting me up for failure. It kept the little girl already struggling to blossom into an adult struggling even more, with this apparent knowledge that it was never gonna work. Another thing that really helped me at some point on my journey to find out what the fuck was wrong with me was discovering the term ambivert exists. I seem extroverted to most people, but if you know me, you know that after a certain amount of time, I can suddenly, without warning, crack just from about one too much of anything. One more noise, one more person, or one more thing to do. This is where another character named Alita, the battle angel, really started to help me out as a young adult. After I watched the movie in 2019, I read most of the mangas. Some of them were so gory and horrific that I felt sick to my stomach, but one thing that usually remained the same for me was a strong connection to the protagonist. Alita is a young woman, but she is also an extremely powerful killing machine. Those two things should not mix or go together, but she can't help it. That's just the way she is. It's how her body was designed and how she has been trained. Alita's body may be a murder weapon, but her mind is just that of a girl. Having to carry the emotional weight of who she is and what she can do and what she has done is absolutely crippling, and yet she always finds a way to go on. I will never forget a scene from Volume 5 at the very end where Alita sees a vision from the villain's perspective, actually, with a former loved one telling him to accept everything that happens, not to blame anyone else, and that your worth is not defined by these things. You are not defined by winning or losing. And Alita cries, saying that her heart just isn't big enough to accept the bad along with the good. But when she looks up, she finds a plant sprouting from the seed a now deceased loved one gave to her, making her remember something beautiful. Perhaps there is beauty to be found in weakness and vulnerability, even in death. Both Alita and I are very black and white. We want to go either all in or not at all. Bad is bad and good is good. Even when we can't explain it, when things feel bad, well, they must be. But choosing not to label everything and not defining myself by how I feel, while acknowledging that those feelings are there, is a constant challenge. A little bit like having a body or reactions that behave very differently from my heart. But when I can actually do this right, mind you, it is incredibly freeing. Anyways, I thought maybe sharing my own perspective as an HSP would be good for me to have as a point of reference, to remind myself to be more mindful of my limits, but also to remember that these limits do not define me, and feeling things deeply and caring so much is not a weakness unless I am pretending that I can carry it all alone. I cannot. I absolutely can't. But thank God that I know people now who don't judge me when I'm emotional and who recognize when I'm carrying too much, who want to help me with that burden. And I'm also so thankful for these stories and characters who have helped me to understand myself better. And as always, thank you for listening.